our job is not always to do what our client wants us to do, but is that in the best interest of our client? And I take that to heart, and I'm hoping a lot more attorneys look at that. I do well in my practice, and that's not from making a lot of money on each client. It's doing a good job and getting referrals. And I'm so busy that I'm making about as much as other attorneys do that don't look at it that way, and I have less stress.
Welcome to Hot Docket, the show where we talk about winning marketing strategies that have built the most successful law firms.
Join us every 2 weeks for the latest trends and tactics to grow your law firm. Welcome to the Hot Docket podcast. Today we're being joined by Anthony Diaz, the Peacemaker, and we're going to be talking about family law.
I can immediately tell that I like Anthony because he's got a brand like out the gate. The Peacemaker is one of the best like one-liner brand named things that I've seen in law in a long time. So I'm very excited. Speaking of, like, how'd you get there? How did you land on Peacemaker?
Wow, that's a really good question. So took a lot of courses like a lot of us attorneys do, how to brand, how to market and things like that. And I was kind of stumbling along, and peace has always been a mantra of mine, just personally. And so I was thinking about peacemaker. Well, that sounds really good. And I've always been a peacemaker, even since I was a kid. People would come to me and solve stuff, and because I was always pretty even keeled and whatnot. And I had a Italian family, and Italian families are, not so even keeled. So they used to come to me. Funny story, when I started going, as the Peacemaker, somebody came up to me and they said, "Do you know what a peacemaker is?" I said, "Yeah, you go and you solve conflict." No. It's a rifle. So back in the Wild West, that's what they would call the Peacemaker, is a rifle, because that's how you solve disputes. So I was like, no, I'm not that, not that bad. I don't have any guns. So it was a pretty interesting. I didn't know that, but it's become a brand, and it's become what I've been known for in Florida and around the country. So I'm blessed to have been able to land on something that people resonate with.
At any moment now, you're going to get a letter in the mail from like Winchester for some sort of trademark violation.
Well, it made me think like it'd be amazing if you now go against like a very aggressive divorce lawyer or something who also goes by the Peacemaker. And it's like Peacemaker versus Peacemaker, different meaning,
It's funny.
different person. Walk us through the evolution of the firm. Like, did you always kind of envision that you'd focus more on like the uncontested? Did you ever start like do more of the litigation side and kind of go to court and do all that stuff? How do you get where you are?
So interesting is that I didn't start off doing family law in private practice. I worked for the state attorney's office. I did some private work other places. And then I started to do criminal defense, because as a state attorney, that's a natural progression, and had a criminal defense practice. And then I started getting calls from my clients on, do you do divorce? Do you do family law? And I never did. I never really wanted to. I've been divorced a couple of times, didn't really want to have to go down that road with anybody else. But I looked at that would really be a neat way to help people have a peaceful resolution to what is normally not a peaceful process. So I took on family law. I was a CPA in my first career, so financial resolution of things came naturally, because that's just what my first career was. And I stopped doing a criminal defense because family law just got to be so busy that I really wanted to focus on that. And I've been focusing on that for almost 20 years now.
How widespread of a problem have you seen it be that lawyers in family law aren't always operating in the best interest of their client, and they're more like going to court so that they could rack up fees, and like they're taking unnecessary steps, like, I don't know, because, one of the people that are filing like just wants to spite their partner and it's not actually in the best interest of the case. Like, how often do you see lawyers taking advantage of that?
It happens a lot. And probably, I think it's happened more often in the past. I think the new generation of lawyers are a little bit more mindful and they're just brought up a different way. But I've had attorneys that just feed off of their clients' emotions, because divorce is an emotional uh, event in your life. And my view as counselor at law, that's kind of the old way of looking at things, but we're our client's counselor. And I think it's our job to say, hey, I know you want to do this and that sounds like a great idea, but kind of here's what that really looks like in court, or here's how that's going to ramp up the case. And now they're going to go ramp it up, and then you feel like you have to ramp it up, and there's no end. So why don't we look at it this way? And I don't mind getting paid, but you're going to pay me a lot more than you'd like to, and you're going to be mad at me at the end. And I don't want you to be mad at me. I want you to have a good outcome. But not all attorneys are like that. They're either in it to make a lot of money and pay for their cars and houses, or their rationalization is, well, this is what my client wants me to do. Well, you know, our job is not always to do what our client wants us to do, but is that in the best interest of our client? And I take that to heart, and I'm hoping a lot more attorneys look at that. You know, I do well in my practice, and that's not from making a lot of money on each client. It's doing a good job and getting referrals. And I'm so busy that, you know, I'm making about as much as other attorneys do that don't look at it that way. And I have less stress. So I like my way of doing things.
Do you believe that most couples should go through mediation prior to anything else?
So, like in Florida, you're ordered to go to mediation if it's a litigation case. You can't see a judge before mediation because most mediations settle. There's about a 90 to 95 success rate in mediations in Florida. And so I'm a high proponent of mediation. I'm a certified mediator. And I think any out of court solution is better than rolling the dice with a judge. So I think clients are learning more and more about that. And they're like, you know, I really would like to have this, but I might not even get that if I go to court. Maybe if I can negotiate and get some of what I need and what I want, that's better than not getting anything. So mediation, you know, is a great way to not only have more of a chance of getting a fair outcome, but to keep the emotion level down and not really ramp it up, which happens when you go to trial and you go to judge. It's a very high emotion. So a good way of keeping that more peaceful is mediation, collaborative divorce, you know, a lot of the other out of court solutions.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say
No,
something.
that's a great answer.
Yeah.
So do you frequently see attorneys that are the exact opposite, where they want to get the most for their client? They're hell-bent on going to trial. And we've seen that family lawyers typically fall in a few different buckets. There are the peacemakers who want to push for mediation, who want a good outcome. And then there are the people, their whole business model relies on a couple of high net worth clients that have to go all the way through trial and end up racking up a ton in fees. Have you seen that in your career, where like there's just a few bad seeds like that kind of tarnish the name of family lawyers across the board?
Well, absolutely. There are, and in the Central Florida community, we all know those attorneys. We call them those attorneys, but it's the ones that, you know, when you get hired and you ask, you know, who is your spouse's attorney, and they say like, okay, this is going to trial. It's just, and I remember I was mediating cases in another county, and there was an attorney, really nice guy. He would never settle a mediation, never, ever, ever. And that was his motto. He was like, there's not enough time to make the decision. Let me sit on it and let me think about it and wound up going to trial all the time. And he just loved to go to trial. There were some attorneys that just love to go to trial. There's an adrenaline rush. And I can understand that because when I was at the state attorney's office, we did a lot of trials and there was just this emotion that you get in. But with the state attorney's office, you're representing the state and victims, and there is kind of a purpose in there. In family law, the way I look at it, unless it's such an issue that is so like either or, like where you can't split the baby, there's no case that should go to trial.
Can you give an example of that?
Absolutely. Relocation. And that's, it's in the statute in Florida where you either need the agreement of the parties, which usually never happens, or you need a court order. So if somebody wants to relocate and the other person doesn't, you really can't say, well, instead of moving to Texas, can you move closer? Well, no, it's still a relocation. So it's either a relocation or not. So a lot of times if your client wants that job, or you have a client that just doesn't want, the child to be moved out of state, that's one of those that's going to need a judge. Now, I will tell you, in saying that, I've had cases that were handled by the collaborative process, and we were able to come up with creative solutions like putting off the relocation for a year, so that the parent that wanted to stay in the state gave them time to relocate to the state that the parent wanted to move to. So, the neat thing about out-of-court resolutions is you're not relying on a judge who doesn't have the time to make decisions. You have the time to be creative and to think out of the box. And wow, I didn't think about that. Well, a judge would have never ordered that. Well, it doesn't matter whether the judge would have ordered it or not, as long as it's not illegal and it's something the parties want to do. So even something as clear-cut as relocation that rarely gets settled, I have seen those cases settled without a court resolution because you have the time and the energy and the people that are invested in finding a solution for the parents.
So the cases that go to trial, and it's kind of all about relocation, what percentage of the time, if you had to guess, does the trial go in favor of what is actually good for the child?
That's a good question. I don't know the percentage. I know
if you had to guess, like if you just had to,
I would say
gut feeling.
Yeah, I would say most of the time the relocation is not approved because most of the time you're taking the child away from a support system, friends, and going into a different place, whereas the parent that was looking to move may be able to get a job like that in the state and didn't have to move out of the state. So the burden is very high in Florida. There is about 13 factors that you have to jump through the hoops to satisfy in a relocation trial. And it's hard to satisfy all of them. Now, all of them aren't equally weighted and you don't have to satisfy all of them, but it's very hard to satisfy enough of those where a court is going to say, yeah, let's approve that. Now, the cases that do get approved, it's where the support system is in the state that the relocation is looking at. They didn't live that long, in the state that they are now. The parent that's in the state isn't able to provide the life that the parent who's moving out of state will be able to provide that parent. So you really have to have a perfect storm for relocation to happen.
Do you have any, sorry to switch the topic a little bit, but do you have any de-escalation techniques that you've seen work really well? Like if you had a playbook, could you share some of the techniques that you've applied and have been successful?
Sure. So de-escalation with my clients?
Could be either side, I suppose, but yeah, let's start with your clients.
So, a lot of them are coming in, high emotion. And for me, what's worked is empathy, just meeting them where they are, not judging them, not say, oh my God, this person, would they just stop complaining or whatnot? I mean, there's obviously a reason that they're in pain. It's putting yourselves in their shoes. Really, they get it and they feel like they're being heard. So when clients are being heard or feel like they're being heard, that really means a lot, because that's really all they're looking for a lot of times, is just to be understood and to be heard. There was this, a Stephen Covey quote, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. So I think a lot of that can go around, not just in law, but in a lot of situations. So that helps me with my clients. Now, attorneys sometimes go off and they're just so in advocate of their clients that they're taking it personally. So one of the ways I disarm them is to say something like, wow, this really means a lot to you. You're getting really fired up here. Is there anything I can do to help that? Or is there anything I did to do that? And they're kind of taken aback. Sometimes they don't realize they're acting that way. And two, even if they are, they don't know how to answer that. You're being nice and they're not being nice. So it kind of, it changes the energy, and it's hard for them to be that way. Now, there are some attorneys I tried that with, and I can't mention their response here. And it was like, okay, well, I tried that. But, being baited by attorneys happens sometimes. And I think us as attorneys, it's not that way. We have to try that. And if that doesn't work, just let them have at it.
Have you ever had to fire a client?
Many times. And
how does that look?
Well, it took me a while to realize that firing goes both ways. And in the beginning, as attorneys, we just want to build up our practice. So we take really any client, and we don't really look at them as much as is this a client that we really want. So I've been better at screening in the beginning, but sometimes you miss things, or sometimes things go downhill. And I think as attorneys, we owe our clients an ethical duty that if there is something in the way, and it doesn't matter what it is, it could be on the client side, it could be on our side, that we need to withdraw from cases, because they need to be with an attorney who's maybe more bombastic than I am, or maybe more tolerable of their behavior. So I've gotten to the point in my career that I want to keep my staff. I don't want to lose my staff over clients, because they deal with them a lot, and it's just not worth it. And I got to the point, hey, listen, I know you're going through a tough time, but that's not acceptable. But we don't work that way. So I think a lot of times they understand. I don't get a lot of pushback. A couple of times I've gotten pushback. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'll do better. In the past, I would have said, okay, well, I'll give you another chance. Now it's like, you only get the one chance. And, I think it's important to have boundaries as attorneys, because I think people will respect us more if we tell them, here's how we do things, here's how things go, and we live up to that.
Yeah, I don't think that's just specific to attorneys either. We have the same types of things in our business where at the start we might have taken anybody, regardless of whether they were a fit for us, and put up with the abuse, for lack of a better word, because we're a young business and we need it. But as we've matured, it's become very clear that those scenarios almost always long-term are negative for our staff, for us, for the business. So I think it's just a relatable fact for anybody who's a business owner.
Are there any laws that you currently look at that you would think need to be changed or modernized, specifically in Florida?
For family law?
For family law.
Yeah, great question. So one of the areas that has been really controversial for Florida over the years has been alimony. And in the past, there was no statutes other than here's anything over X amount of years is eligible for permanent alimony. And that was it. There was no guidelines, there was no calculations. Recently, they've changed that to give some guardrails in terms of duration. So now the length of marriage will determine the maximum you could get durationally in a court. It's either short, medium, or long term. There is no permanent alimony in Florida. They also now have some general calculations for the amount of alimony. It's still very vague. So I would like them to look at alimony almost like the way child support is in Florida. It's a calculation. You have a software, you put the factors in, and it spits out the exact amount of child support. There is no argument there. And I think that would be great to do something along the lines of alimony. Maybe not exactly like that, but somewhere more certainty instead of a range, because I saw what's happened with this new law. It's helping more cases to settle, because before we didn't have a range. Now we have a range, but we still have cases that would like to have more certainty. And I think if they were able to give more certainty in alimony calculations, I think more cases would settle either before mediation or at mediation, because they wouldn't need to go to trial. You know what a judge is going to do, because the judge is going to run the same numbers. So if Florida could keep doing that, and I don't anticipate that because it took them years and years and years to get to this point. But if they were looking at lightening the load in the judicial system, because right now they're overloaded, they can't fund more judges, that would be a way to do it, is to have more certainty. Now, what's interesting is the Trial Lawyers Association is against that. And the reason why they don't want certainty, they want cases to go to trial. They want that vagueness there, because they can say, oh, well, you can get between here and here. They're only offering this much. You can get this much if you went to court. And that kind of drives that. So I think as long as they're driving the bus, that might be hard to do. But I think it would really help a lot of people if that statute was tightened up a little bit.
I have a question about the calculators since you brought it up. So if I heard you correctly, you said child support is pretty cut and dry in Florida, where you plug in some calculations and it gives you the child support amount.
Yep.
How do you feel if those numbers were exposed on like your website? Like, how do you feel about case calculators on people's sites that say, put in some basic information and here's what you could expect to pay in terms of child support? So they know before they even become an intake or retained client, like an expectation. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, it's not a bad thing. It could be a little misleading. And the reason why I say that is you need both parents. And unless unless the person who's coming to see you has the income of the other parent, it may not be a correct calculation, or they may have incorrect information. So I think calculators are good to at least give people a general idea. And I've had people come to me, I don't have those calculators, but I know a number of attorneys who are very good, who have the calculators. And what I tell them is that could be right. I will verify that with you. So I can't speak to whether it's exactly right, because again, depending on the information that's put in there, if the person who's putting in the information in the calculator doesn't put all the information in, didn't know that it had to put this in there or that in there, that could change it. Also, most of the calculators go by gross income, and they have their own tax way of calculating tax. A lot of people just put in the net, and then it drills it down from there. So the calculators are good, but just like the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, unless you know the information that's going in is accurate, it's hard to tell if the information it's spitting out is accurate.
Understood. And we have definitely experienced this. It is probably the number one source of pushback for folks when we offer to implement calculators is either they don't want to give a number that potential clients pin to, and then it's like, why didn't you give me that much? Or like, why whatever. That's number one. And number two is like just general inaccuracy. They want to make sure that the value that they're giving is like precise. So garbage in, garbage out, measure twice, cut once, kind of all the same thing there. Okay. I think this is as good a point as any to wrap up. Is there anything else, Anthony, that you want folks who are listening to know, whether it's some stuff that you've got coming out or just general information about what's going on, anything like that in Florida?
Sure.
I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys are going to put some links in the show notes. I've got some ebooks for people. One of them is Divorce with Dignity. Another one is about relationships and saving relationships before divorce happens, and how to resolve conflict that happens with compassion. I think those ebooks would serve people well. The other thing, just in generally about divorce, and I don't know if you guys have been through it. I've been through it. Divorce isn't easy, but it doesn't have to be hard. And there's a lot of ways as attorneys we can make divorce not hard for people. It may not be easy, but it doesn't have to be hard. And that's what we do, at our firm, is to just know that this isn't a great situation. What can we do to soften one of the most emotional events that could ever happen in your life? So just know that if you're looking around for an attorney, there are attorneys out there that are peacemakers, and those attorneys like myself really are interested in your best interests, because that's what it's all about.
Well said. Thanks again for joining us today, Anthony, aka the Peacemaker Diaz. It's been a real pleasure. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Hot Docket. We're your hosts, Bobby and Andrew, founders of MeanPub, the marketing agency for ambitious law firms.
Have questions about marketing or anything we covered today? Email us at mark@meanpug.com.